Hello everyone, I'm Kelly Brown. I'm here again because my opponent argues that absentee ballots are efficient for everyone, but this is certainly not true. As more states embrace mail-in voting amid the coronavirus pandemic, the often overlooked detail of postage has emerged as a prominent dividing line. My opponent's statements are very contradicting. They stated that mail-in ballots are not vulnerable to fraud and are inclusive to all, but the Voters Protection Hotline states otherwise. Voting Right Group says stamp requirements is another major problem that hits lower income and minority communities the hardest. Charging money for the right to vote is very unconstitutional, whether it's a penny or a dollar. It is also safe to say that mail-in ballots are a bit too costly with no security. Many Americans requested mail-in ballots, but for whatever reason, decided to cast their votes at the polls on Election Day. Can you say a waste in tax dollars? And let's not forget about the 20% of provisional ballots that are typically rejected. In the middle of a pandemic, it's not the time to be needlessly spending money. The unemployment rate has skyrocketed since the pandemic hit, and I agree, it would be expensive at a time when we're facing economic depression and economic problems throughout the country. Mail-in voting is not the way to carry our nation to change. We must implement a system that is inclusive to all without being discriminative against the majority. I'm Kelly Brown. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. My name is Jessica Williams, and this year has caused a lot to change. One of those things being is how we vote. Coronavirus did it again. This year has caused a lot of people to participate in mail-in ballots. The reason for this is because people fear standing in lines and touching screens can lead to contracting the virus. However, yes, it can affect us, but it also has a major effect on how we get the results for the election. It seems to be safer to do mail-in ballots to keep the health issues down right now. However, there are known facts that it can delay the results. Look at the current election we in right now. All mail-in ballots must be counted for. In research, I have found that Michigan and Pennsylvania lets you request mail-in ballots, but they did not update their laws for processing them, which can lead to a huge number being unaccounted for. Also, with the election dates, we have certain days that we get out here and vote and learn about the results. However, with mail-in ballots, this will change. For example, in Maryland, their primary election was changed from late April to June due to the pandemic and the mail-in ballots. Also, I found in research that in 15 states, they do not allow election workers to process mail-in ballots until Election Day. That slows the reporting results significantly and requires more workers than needed in states that allow ballots to be processed. This means there should be more funding for paid volunteers who has to process and count votes on Election Day. Counting can take days and to get the correct results. When it comes to the results of mail-in ballots, candidates tend to be questioning it because there is a delay and can lead to some days or days behind the election. For example, in the 2018 election with House Representative Kevin McCarthy, he thought he was winning until the late arriving mail-in ballots were counted for. This also happened with Senator Rick Scott in Florida. However, he filed a lawsuit against it. Using mail-in ballots can cause the election to slow down, change dates. It will no longer be the traditional way of voting. Thank you.
My name is Brian Burgess, and my response is to Chase, who presented the third argument of responsibility and the claims related to signature examination in the vote by mail process. Now, my opponent argues that professionals who have been trained to examine vote by mail signatures validate those signatures by comparing them to signatures on file. First, I would ask my opponent, is he referring to those same trained professionals who are in the To the Poll ad published by the ACLU of Georgia? However, the vote by mail signature validation process is questionable because according to evidence reported by the ACLU of Florida, they found that vote by mail ballots had higher rejection rates. And Second, my opponent argues that there is no fraud because of the signature validation process and the curing process. But again, according to the ACLU of Florida, the curing process fails because it lacks legislative oversight. The real world impact of higher vote by mail rejection rates by those trained professionals and poor curing processes needed to inform impacted voters signal voter fraud opportunities. Therefore, in this debate, signature validation processes by trained professionals increase uncounted vote by mail ballots and is a clear sign of voter fraud.
Hello, my name is Haley Richardson, and I'm here to speak with you today about accusations that have been made against our Postmaster General, Louis DeJoy. These accusations were made by the other team in their video during their opening statement, saying that Mr. DeJoy was attempting to manipulate the election as well as putting into practice some unethical tactics. Now, I did want to address using a New York Times article, a couple of things in regards to what our opponent spoke on. Number one, in this New York Times article, is the fact that it addressed Mr. DeJoy requesting that first-class service be used when mailing in ballots. Now, a spokeswoman for the Postal Service named Martha Johnson did come out and explained that the reason why he was requesting that first-class service be used is because the delivery time on election ballots would be much less using first-class service rather than standard delivery. First-class service usually gets the mail delivered in 2 to 3 days, whereas standard delivery typically takes 7 to 10 days. So you can see that it would be a much quicker process to get ballots turned in. Now, when it comes to ballots getting turned in, it's essential that they were submitted in a timely manner. And the United States Postal Service couldn't guarantee that they would be if they were sent in via standard delivery. I have guidelines here for an absentee ballot that talks about that time frame. It does state an absentee ballot must be received in the office of the Board of Registrars by 7 p.m. on the primary or election day in order to be counted. And this is specifically for the state of Georgia. Now, it's important to realize that Mr. DeJoy was simply making a recommendation to use first-class service to make sure that the ballots reached the proper election polls in time in order to be counted. It was not necessarily a requirement. Also, our opponents talked about his manipulation of the election through changing machinery and processes, but he did come out in that same New York Times article to defend himself and state that he was making these changes in order to save money. And focus on the long-term stability of the United States Postal Service, which we know has clearly been in dire straits financially for a good amount of time now. And I do think that Dubrin, in his chapter on leadership ethics and social responsibility, would be aware that Mr. DeJoy is trying to consider all the stakeholders, which are the American citizens in this election and beyond that, by trying to maintain the United States Postal Service as a viable service for all citizens. So as you can see, Mr. DeJoy is not trying to manipulate the elections or undermine the USPS, but rather trying to save it and recommending using quicker services in order to ensure that American votes get counted in this election, as many as possible, which is important, considering that mail-in ballots are likely to slow down, are pretty much ensured to slow down the election process, as we spoke about a little bit earlier. Thank you for your time.
Our rebuttal concludes that mail-in voting is costly, one, for requiring postage, Stamps are more expensive, and due to the COVID-19 pandemic, most citizens are financially impaired to purchase stamps because of their obligations to pay bills at home. State and local jurisdictions have rejected motions for postage-free or prepaid postage for mail-in ballots, thus contributing to voter suppression. Outdated records also contribute to duplicate copies of ballots, thus being more costly and non-eco-friendly. Mail-in voting protocols such as curing are questionable because of the ineffective verification methods. According to a 2005 bipartisan report, Building Confidence in American Elections, co-chaired by President Jimmy Carter, most mail-in voting fraud has been committed through forged signatures of deceased citizens, duplicate ballots produced, and outdated registration records. As seen in our 2020 presidential election, we experienced significant delays 4 days after the election. After results, mail-in ballots were still questionable because of the close margin, and per election rules, this can grant a recount, and currently Georgia is about to conduct their third recount of nearly 5 million ballots. Published records in the 2020 presidential election solidify our claims of the unreliable use of mail-in voting ballots.
Of course, those who are most at risk or too sick or disabled to vote in person should be able to vote with absentee ballots. But the rest of us should be able to vote at our polling place in person, using the same health safety protocols we're using to go to the pharmacy or grocery stores. Voting is one of the most solemn, patriotic duties we have as citizens of this great country. We have the right to ensure our vote will be counted when we ourselves drop it in the ballot box, rather than depending on the Postal Service or some stranger to maybe, hopefully, deliver our ballot and not change who we voted for.